natural gas, in my mind, but also there are facts that'll show it, is one of the most powerful decarbonization tools. In fact, I'll show over the last 15 years, it's been the most powerful decarbonization tool here in the United States, and there's a lot more we can do here at home and around the world. Natural gas is also absolutely key to providing energy security around the world. It is abundant, it is affordable, and it is critical to preserve and extend the quality of life that we get to enjoy here at home, but that so many others are seeking around the world. And natural gas is critical. Critical. This is also a story not well told. You cannot implement and accelerate renewables and electrification without having natural gas as a reliable complement to those technologies. We're going to show that anywhere where we've increased the penetration of renewables and electrification, it's only made possible by having natural gas as a complementary partner. And the only way to accelerate renewables and electrification is to also increase natural gas infrastructure. And so we'll talk about these three key topic areas. So first, natural gas is a powerful decarbonization tool. This is not a theory, this is a fact. Over the last 15 years, we have proven that natural gas is the most powerful decarbonization tool that we have, and we have it at scale. Over the last 15 years, 60% of the emissions reductions in the United States have been as a result of natural gas. If I ask my 15-year-old kid, I can tell you, hey, what was the largest contributor to reducing emissions in the last 15 years in the United States? I guarantee you he wouldn't say natural gas. But that's a fact. He'd say it's got to be Tesla, or it's got to be solar panels, or it's got to be windmills. But in fact, natural gas has been the single largest contributor to reducing greenhouse gas emissions here at home. It's equivalent to taking over 100 million cars off the road each and every day. That's like taking every passenger vehicle that's on the road today off the roads from an emissions benefit perspective. Show me any technology that we have that at scale, affordably, can do that. There's nothing else like it, and there's still much more that we can do. In fact, here in the United States, we still have over 200 coal plants operating. And the reductions we've seen over the last 15 years have been primarily by natural gas growing and displacing dirtier fuels, in large part displacing coal for power generation. And you can see here that as a country, we still have over 200 coal plants that are operating. And if you converted the remaining 200 coal plants to natural gas, it would again be equivalent to taking another 100 million cars off the road. With the technology that we have today, we can do this at scale. This doesn't require some incredible new invention. We know how to do this, we can do it, and there's so much more that we can do with natural gas here still in the United States. But the challenge that we have is that emissions know no borders. Even though we've had great success here in the United States, we've taken coal power generation, converted it to natural gas, we've driven down emissions. All the benefits that we've achieved here in the United States have far been overcome by increasing emissions around the world, primarily through coal power generation growing around the world. You can see China, just in the past year, generated 5 times the amount of power from coal than the United States did. And just in the last year, while we still have just about 200 coal plants operating in the US, China permitted another almost 170 coal plants just in the last year. So this is not a domestic problem. The world, the borders, the emissions, the world doesn't recognize borders. So if we want to drive down emissions around the world, we've got to take what we've proven we can do in the US, and we've got to take that same solution to the rest of the world. This is the biggest opportunity we have to drive down emissions around the world. We know how to do it. We've proven that we can do it. But China's still just getting started. And we'll talk in a minute about India, which just last month became the most populated country on the planet. It's been centuries since China hasn't been the most populous country on the planet. And just this past month, it's been projected that India surpassed China in population, and India is just barely getting started. Today, a person in China consumes 1/3 of the amount of power and energy that someone in the United States does. 3 billion people still live in this world, heat their food, cook their food, heat their homes with wood, coal, or animal manure. 3 billion people. This is an incredible stat. 17,000 kids die every day from causes that could be prevented if they had access to reliable energy. That's over 6 million kids a year dying because of a lack of access to energy. My wife and I travel. We've traveled to Africa, and I can tell you why it's so important and why the world needs energy. Going to a village in Africa and seeing that there are schools that we take this for granted, schools that can only have their kids read books during the day because they don't have electricity and they don't have lights. Imagine the difference between being able to read a book at night and not. Just because you have access to energy. Energy is the enabler. Energy is the engine that creates the advancement of civilization and the lifestyle that we take for granted every day. But there are billions of people around the world that frankly, deserve what we have. I mentioned in China, they use about 1/3 of what we use on a per capita basis, but as they move out of poverty and they increase their quality of life, they're going to get more like we are. India uses 1/15 the energy per capita that we use in the United States. We use 15 times more per person energy in the United States to enjoy the quality of life that we have. They deserve that same quality of life. And you look how China has done it. If you look on this chart, China has done it through coal and oil primarily. And India is just getting started. And how are they going to find their energy? Someone who doesn't have access to clean water or sanitation, doesn't have access to clean heating sources and cooking sources inside their homes, they're going to seek the most abundant, most affordable, most available energy that they can. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to be sources that continue to grow emissions around the world. And so that's why natural gas is so important as a tool, not only decarbonizing the United States, but also helping to decarbonize around the world by displacing dirtier fuels. And you can see here that this shows the world's growth in energy demand. Virtually no energy source has decreased. It's been increasing. Every source of energy around the world, because the world needs so much more energy. And this is the challenge of our time. How do we provide the energy needs for the world while at the same time addressing global emissions? This is the challenge that our employees and our kids are going to take on. And natural gas is a huge part of that story. You can see here, this chart shows that virtually across the board by 2040, every source of energy will have grown, or in the case of coal, won't have declined much, will be about where it is today in this projection. And you just saw what India and China, and think about Africa and the rest of the world, what are they going to look to for energy? If we're not careful, they're going to continue to look towards coal and other dirtier fuels. And so natural gas is going to play a huge role. You can see here the growth of natural gas. Renewables are going to be incredibly important, but I'll show you. And as I mentioned, you can't have renewables without having reliable natural gas to support the growth in renewables. And so we'll talk for a minute about the key to energy security alongside the need to grow energy delivery and decarbonization. You hear a lot about where the energy of the future is going to come from. Today, the United States is the leading producer of oil and natural gas. You can see here on this chart, this is about a year and a half old. On the one side, it talks about extraction. It shows extraction. U.S. leads in oil and natural gas. On the other side, it's processing, which includes LNG exports. Here it shows that we were about third place in LNG exports. Just over the last year and a half, we are now the largest exporter of LNG around the world. In just under 8 years. 8 years ago, we weren't exporting any natural gas. We're now the largest exporter of natural gas around the world. We're not in the top 10 in producing or refining lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, everything that's required for batteries, for windmills, for solar panels. China controls the value chain for those rare earth minerals and the products that we need to expand renewables. We are the world's leader in oil and natural gas. We've got to protect that industry and make sure that we don't end up in a situation like we're seeing in Europe. And thank goodness that we have the ability to do with LNG what we've done to help our friends and allies in Europe. Imagine what life would have been like for Europe. This is what happened over the last 18 months for Europe. We've shipped more natural gas to Europe, more than double the amount of natural gas that we shipped in 2021. We shipped in 2022 to Europe to help Europe because they've been under threat because they've outsourced their energy supply. They've been dependent upon Russia for natural gas. And as we know, Russia invaded Ukraine, and Europe found themselves held hostage from an energy security perspective. You know, the Zamrin family, my family, actually came from Ukraine in the early 1900s. They left because of war. They left because of persecution. They left to seek security here in the United States. I can't tell you how proud I am, how proud everyone here should be to live in a country, to work for an industry, to work for a company that is truly providing energy security here at home and to our friends around the world. We produce energy in Pennsylvania, in Wyoming, in Louisiana, and we ship it to our friends overseas in Europe and Asia. It's an incredible story, and it's incredibly important that we protect what we've built as a country and what we've contributed to as a company. And when you look at the story of natural gas, it's not just important from an energy security perspective, but here's a statistic here at home, and it's even more important around the world. There is no other energy resource that is as abundant as natural gas and as affordable. Here at home, natural gas is about a quarter of the cost of electricity when you look at in-home end use by our consumer. A quarter. Electricity is 4 times the cost of natural gas here at home. And around the world, it's even more dramatic. And so we've got to make sure that we leverage natural gas to ensure energy affordability and reliability. And there is no other value chain like the natural gas value chain. I mean, it is truly the equation that we try to solve in every other part of the energy value chain. We can produce energy far from where it's stored, from where it's needed. We can transport it literally thousands of miles without losing any of it. We can store vast quantities of it underground without it depleting over time. We can dispatch it when and where it's needed. That is the equation that we're trying to solve with renewables. It's the equation we try to solve with electricity. There is no other energy value chain at scale like the natural gas value chain. It's something that we've got to figure out how to continue to expand, but also leverage when we think about increasing the benefits of natural gas, but also moving the energy of the future. And as I mentioned earlier, when we talked about China and India and Africa, 60% of the people around the world still live in some form of energy poverty. So what better value chain should we leverage than the natural gas value chain, where we've proven that we can deliver energy affordably, reliably, we can dispatch it when and where it's needed like no other energy around the world. And as you'll see, it's also incredibly important that natural gas helps and is truly the enabler for a growing renewables and electrification economy. This is not one or the other. You really need them both together. And we, as an industry and as a company, can accelerate the adoption of renewables and electrification by continuing to expand natural gas. But if we don't, we also know that the reliability of an energy economy based on renewables will not support our needs without natural gas as an important complementary tool. You can see here why. Natural gas, and this is not our math. This is what a regulator ascribes to the reliability and availability of energy resources. 100% availability is ascribed to a natural gas power plant. 100%. If we need it, we can turn it on. If we need it to give us more or less, we can regulate the amount of energy that gets delivered. Solar and wind, typically 10 to 30%. This is not a dig at solar and wind. The sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day. It doesn't shine the same every day. The wind doesn't always blow, and when it does, it's not always blowing. And it's interesting, just like the sun, the wind actually goes over the course of a day through a pattern that affects the amount of energy that we get. And we can show results that show it. And most people don't realize this. This is happening every day. In fact, you think about where renewables have been most powerful in the United States. Again, if I asked my 15-year-old kid, he'd probably say, it's got to be California, or it's got to be New York City. That's where I hear about all this. Well, in fact, it's Texas, it's Oklahoma. On any given day in Oklahoma, the wind is blowing to a certain degree, and when the wind slows down, the natural gas power generation picks up the slack. The same thing happens in Texas. Massive amounts of wind power, oscillate throughout the day, and the only reason that works is because natural gas picks up the slack when the wind slows down, or as the sun sets later on in the day, we come home at the time when we need energy most. We turn on our air conditioning. We start preparing our meals. Start watching, in my wife's case, really bad reality TV. That's when we need energy the most. And that's when the sun is setting and the wind is oftentimes slowing down. That's when natural gas picks up the pace and makes it all possible. This is an example of Winter Storm Elliott, where you can see the orange and the yellow. That's the wind and that's the sun. You can see the sun, provided a bit of energy in Texas during the middle part of the day. You can actually see the phenomenon that oftentimes when winter weather is at its worst and it gets the coldest, the wind actually slows down. When we need the energy the most, oftentimes in the winter, we don't have sunlight. The wind slows down. We've got to have a solution like natural gas that provides the ability to have renewables, but the ability to make sure we don't lose reliability and we can provide energy when we need it. And in addition to powering renewables and electrification, as we showed earlier, the world needs more energy. We want to also accelerate the energy of the future. We see it with LNG demand, liquefied natural gas. As I mentioned, the United States has become the largest exporter of LNG in just the past 8 years. It's a tremendous story. It is a resource that we need to protect, preserve, and grow. And you can see that the world's demand for LNG will grow significantly over the next 10 years. I mean, this demand will be filled. And if not by us, it will probably almost all be filled by the Middle East. And so, go back to that European story and imagine a world in which we can't provide the world the energy that it needs for its own energy security, to advance its own renewables and electrification. And so we've got to make sure that our industry can provide LNG for the rest of the world. And so this is what it looks like here at home. You saw the global demand on the other slide, which, by the way, is not constrained by demand. I can tell you that China is not building coal power plants because they want to install coal. I mean, they have I showed you the impact on, 6 million kids a year dying, 3 billion people cooking their food and heating their homes with sources that create, respiratory illnesses and cut lives short. They're not generating their energy with those resources because they want to. They're generating with those resources because they have to. They don't have clean natural gas and other sources available. So this is only constrained by the amount of infrastructure that we can build and the amount of energy that we can provide to the world. And so you look here at home, this is our forecast for LNG growth over the next 10 years. Will significantly expand. We expect to more than double. Imagine that. 8 years ago, there were only 3 main demand points in the United States for natural gas. It was residential and commercial, power generation, and industrial demand. And just in under a decade, exports will become the 4th effectively equal pillar of demand here in the United States. That's how you change the world. That's how you scale up an energy solution. There is no other energy solution like it on the planet where we've done that. But we got to get out of our own way in order to do it. And this should drive every one of us crazy. You can argue that there's a crisis. You can argue that there's a war in Europe. But in just under 10 months, because of their dependence on Russia for natural gas, Germany, from concept to completion, built an LNG import terminal. We've been trying to build the Mountain Valley Pipeline here in the United States for more than 8 years. And that's not the only project that's been delayed. Look around our industry, look at any industry. This is the country that built the interstate highway system. This is the country that built the Hoover Dam. This is the country that, where a lot of the pipelines came from during wartime in the 1940s, when German U-boats were sinking oil tankers that were taking oil from the Gulf Coast to New York so that we could power our Navy. We built pipelines across the country so that we could get that energy from where it was produced to where it was needed. That's what we used to do in the United States. We don't do that anymore. Now we can't even get a pipeline built in 8 years. You can't tell me that Germany can do things bigger and better than we can. That should make every one of us both frustrated but also excited about getting after it and making it happen here in the United States like we haven't been able to in the last few years. And so, with that, I'll finish by talking about my 18-year-old son. My 18-year-old son is about to go to college, and part of me is really glad, I'm ready. But part of me sits and wonders, what's he going to think when he gets out of college just 4 years from now? I want him to come out of college and think about going to work in an industry that will change the world for the better. I want him to think about a company that he would be proud to work for to solve the world's greatest challenges. And I can tell you, the great thing about our industry and our company is that we have that here. We haven't always done a great job of communicating that opportunity and that story. That's what we've got to do. Because if we don't, the world may overlook us, and if that happens, I promise you it's not good for the planet. It's not good for humanity. So I want my son 4 years from now, that's my goal, to graduate college and to say, I would be so lucky, so proud to go work for the natural gas industry. That's a place where not only are we going to solve today's energy challenges, natural gas is the most powerful decarbonization tool today, but we're also going to figure out how to move the energy of the future, how to build things at scale, how to do things that have never been done before, how to deliver more energy, how to lift more people out of poverty, do it in a way that drives down emissions and makes the planet a better place for everyone. That's my goal, that 4 years from now when he graduates, he looks at our company, he looks at our industry and says, that's where I want to go to work, because that's where it's going to happen. That's where we're going to solve the world's greatest problems. And so I appreciate the opportunity to share that story. Hopefully you see how important the challenge is, but also how critical what you do every day is, what our industry can do, and what we do as a company. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.